Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord. Average folks in the afterlife, as if I could forget, and Frederick Sculthorp and his second book. I wonder if you can see that. Very small pamphlet, 80, 90 pages, published in 1975. 14 years after the first, more about the spirit world and experiences in astral projection. He does repeat some of the same material, goes over it in perhaps greater detail, thinking it over, and some different perspectives. And I think it's worth spending a little while with it. And I'll just, push on. And we'll see how it goes. I have now experienced astral projection for over 30 years, and as all the travels, except for a half dozen or so, were to the spirit world, it has given me a little knowledge of spirit life and an inward happiness, because all life continues. No yearning for a reunion is unanswered, even with our animal friends. Some may think that in the intervening period before the reunion in spirit, something has been lost, or perhaps that loving companionship has waned with the years. That is not so. All memory is contained and held in the spirit body, which encompasses the physical body on earth. The physical brain is simply the detector, in the electronic sense, of that memory, and as we all know, age can dull that physical organ. Good point. Age can dull that physical organ. In the sensitive spirit body, memories of the past are there with all the details, and there is no physical impediment. Therefore, the past is present. To emphasize the significance of this, time as we know it is absent, and the companionship continues, but with intensified happiness, because love emanates from the surrounding auras of two spirit friends meeting, causing the further upliftment of both. The spirit message we often hear, "I am very happy," can mean more than the actual words convey, as I very well know. Many on earth with the desire for knowledge will later be amazed at the wonderful effects of the spirit laws, if they are willing to listen to the spirit teachers. What the Master taught, that's Master with a capital M, so we know who he's talking about. Although, let me tell you, there's way more than one, not the Master, but many Masters. And mistresses too, I might add, although gender is not significant, but I should add that. Mistresses too. The divine feminine is fully expressed on the astral and mental planes. What the Master taught can be better understood, and with this understanding, the mentality becomes clearer and open to further knowledge. The increase of knowledge of physics, radiation, and electronics is helpful, and the physicists know that everything has a rhythmic pulsation or vibration of different frequencies. It is hard to define the borderline of physical and spiritual. The colored butterfly which finds the budelia blossom, or the moth that can find its own species even miles away, can be an upwind sensing of molecules. Yet one must realize the delicacy of the antenna and the sensing of the rhythmic frequency of the molecules. I have found that in the spirit world, water can flow, is buoyant, and can be drunk, but it does not wet my spirit clothes if I enter it. The free particles of all atoms gravitate to the magnetic belt surrounding the earth and form the familiar localities and countries which one sees in the first spirit planes. As they are of different atomic structure, all places on earth have a different frequency or vibration, and this is so with the counterpart of the localities of the spirit world. A person passing over from this country would not go to a Chinese or South American part of the spirit world, as the spirit body is inured to the vibration frequency of its own country. An analogy is the mystery of the adult salmon, which, even from a vast ocean, is drawn back to the same river of its spawning. Good point. It is simply because no other place has that frequency of vibration. Let us hope that the search for knowledge flows over the border from the physical to the spiritual. I have before me a cutting taken from the Daily Telegraph, some time ago. Interesting to see what this says. The announcement of the American Atomic and Energy Authority of the discovery of the anti-X10 particle is of particular interest to astronomers. The idea of antiparticles gives rise to some fascinating possibilities. It is quite conceivable that there might exist a kind of looking-glass world in which all matter is made up from antimatter. Life in such a world would be exactly the same as ours. For all we know, such a world might well be in the far distant parts of the universe. There we go, a little bit of science from the early 1970s. I had projected at night and was taken to a bright plain in spirit which denoted a progressed state. I was alone on a vast grassy plain, and as I waited expectantly and looked at the beautiful clear surroundings, I saw 2 pinpoints of light far away in the distance. They seemed to get brighter and then suddenly became 2 brilliant orbs of blue-white light which were traveling towards me at tremendous speed. Orbs. Now there's a word that wasn't trendy in 1975, that's for sure. Before I had time to be startled, they stopped before me and became 2 young men. Orbs becoming men. They were 2 of my army companions of the 1914 war who had passed over and made good progress in spirit. So there you go. A couple of ordinary army guys making good progress. Learning to travel as orbs, learning to give up their attachment to form, if only for the sake of travel. Their appearance was very fine and bright, and I sensed their extreme happiness in meeting me, and their thoughts contained a wonderful flood of benevolence and companionship, which rather touched me. I, in turn, was also tremendously happy to see them, which no doubt they also sensed, and we excitedly recorded our former times together on Earth. We chatted for a while and then said goodbye, and as they started to go, one suddenly turned back and kissed me on the cheek, and then rejoined his companion. I was not surprised. I knew that his progressed state held the sincerity and tenderness of real brotherhood, and the kiss meant more, much more, than he could express in words. Much happiness is felt in the sensitive spirit body when meeting friends. In this meeting, when I saw my companions, I was naturally happy to see them and radiated that thought. In turn, my friend's pleasure in seeing me emitted a similar thought which infused my spirit body with further friendship toward them. This interchange of thought passes back and forth with mounting intensity and speed and is cumulative, so much so that all the dross of earth life is forgotten, and I felt instantly happy to be with them. All the dross of earth life. This is the spirit effect of God's laws, for what is given out is returned 100-fold, and the feeling of companionship and closeness was much greater than we ever felt toward each other on earth. How much more so does this law take effect when meeting one's marriage partner in spirit? Now, he from here and in other areas in this book, he quotes a channeled entity from his day, probably channeled by some relatively well-known medium at the day, but without much reference. Anyway, the channeled entity's name is Zodiac, so you'll understand the references here. Zodiac says, in quote, Marriage and the Afterlife, true it is that there is no marriage in the bright spheres, but there is a unity between soul and soul which far transcends anything that has ever been experienced under even the most ideal conditions on earth. That's from an article called The Greater World, January 12th, 1963. What is it that far transcends anything on earth? In the earthly body, it is difficult to imagine the finer sensibility and feeling that pervades the spirit body. And after many years of experience of life in the spirit, I find it equally hard to describe it. If meeting my army companions in spirit gave me such happiness, the reunion with my wife in spirit was certainly beyond all earthly happiness. In the mingling of auras, we knew each other's thoughts, and there was a blend of affection which was far beyond earth and biological reasoning. Oh, I like that, biological reasoning. There's a contradiction in terms. The union of tender and sincere thoughts made us good conductors to the influx of the ever-present God stream. It was almost overwhelming, and we wanted nothing more than the bliss of one another's company. Now, to me, that's they're channeling that energy through their heart chakra just because it's love united. And as I've indicated a few times, I forget which book or which, it doesn't really matter. When you're channeling that through your heart chakra in spirit, it's very all-encompassing. And it can be more, how shall we say, satisfying than at another level in spirit. You will be feeling sensual love for someone, and you will have some level of intercourse in the old-fashioned way. And that's pretty darn good too. No question about it. And on many of the paradise levels, there's lots of that going on, let me tell you. No lack of it. But then people find out, somehow or other, not everybody, some, that you can channel that energy through the heart chakra, and it's even more intense. And then, if you want to channel it through this one, the third eye, it's beyond mind-blowing. Basically, you lose your identity and it's sort of a cosmic consciousness thing, and it needs both partners to want to do it and be at the level where they can handle it. And you channel that energy through the third eye, and you third eye each other, and it's beyond bliss, let me tell you. But just a small addition there. The union of tender and sincere thoughts made us good conductors to the influx of the ever-present God stream. Spiritual things must be spiritually discerned, and spiritual feeling can only be felt in its fullness in the spirit body. An earthly analogy, if one is moved by beautiful melody, would be to imagine that feeling magnified 1,000 times and shared with one's beloved. Here's another quote from Zodiac. And when they come home, they will find their loved ones waiting for them. And in that reunion, which means a unity which is impossible to explain in words because it is of the spirit and not of the body, the joy and perfect happiness becomes their own. Brackets here. The teacher from the spirit world, Zodiac, quoted at times, is the one mentioned in the St. Mark's Gospel, chapter 12, verses 28 to 34. Now there's an accurate Bible quote for you. He spoke through the mediumship of Winifred Moyes from 1921 to 1951. There we go. I had projected during the night and met my wife, who had passed over in a house full of ladies. As well as the great happiness we felt, as in all our meetings, it was very pleasant to be with these people, as it was a progressed plane. All the ladies were busy, and I sensed the preparation for a party or some kind of celebration. A newcomer entered, a lady with a basket containing a parcel, and someone said, "It's the Queen." But I did not recognize what past queen she was. I went with my wife to another room, and presently she said she would help the others prepare some dishes. Left alone, I saw a book on a table and sat down and casually turned the leaves. The book dealt with furniture, flower arrangement, etc., of a home in spirit, and the position of windows and their outlook. Reminds me of several coffee table design books I've seen at the library with people who have the time, the money, and the good taste to decorate their dwellings in unusual and beautiful ways. They can be quite marvelous to look at. You look at it and think, oh, if only I could afford to do that. Here you are sitting in normal chairs looking at normal windows. But always a pleasure. As I saw the illustrations and read the paragraphs, I became enveloped in a strange happiness, a warm welcome, and I realized that my sensitive spirit body was psychometrizing all that the spirit author had impressed on the book. The picture of a comfortable room would emit a wonderful warmth of welcome. A window would become a panorama of beauty, showing sunny lawns bordered by flowers, while the mind of a great friend seemed to draw one to share its beauty with him. My casual look at this apparently ordinary book had turned to a delightful happiness. In fact, I almost lived in it. I suddenly sensed the presence of my wife and looked up. Knowing my interest in books, she had turned back to see the effect it had on me, and stood smiling. I said to her, "What a wonderful book. I wonder if I could get one like it." "You will," she said. I got up and we went into another room where the others were, and then I lost consciousness. Brackets. Consciousness often waxes and wanes during a projection. but the higher self, the finer spirit body, still carries on. No, I wouldn't necessarily call, as he does, the spirit body, the astral body, the higher self. I think he's not experienced enough or somehow confused. The higher self is, as we've discussed many times, is far beyond the astral plane. It can descend there, but it doesn't normally live there. And what you experience from higher self is other projections from higher self that were or are contemporaneously created. Or in my case, if you read my second book, there's a bunch of astral beings, I think there's 4 of them, that are created around the same time as Gordon here came down to Earth in 1952. And they answer to the name Gordon, and they're spirit helpers, and they do all kinds of stuff. They answer to other names too, and they have their own independent existence, but they are projections from the quote-unquote my higher self. Although some of us have pondered this, me especially, what's the point of saying my higher self? I mean, there's all these higher selves or group souls or whatever, and everybody belongs to one, but you belong to one and have an independent existence all at the same time. It's not like you're in the army or you're in an organization. You're completely free, but you do sort of come from this source. And this source is quite interested in what you do, although it doesn't really care that much as long as you do something. In fact, I don't think it even cares if you don't do much, although you kind of hold up the progress of the others in the higher self. If you're a real sort of laggard, they can't really sort of graduate until you sort of do your own little graduation and join the graduated club, as it were. And I think a lot of you probably know this anyway. But just to go back to that point. Becoming conscious again, I found that the tea party was nearly over and I was finishing a trifle of fruit and jelly, which was rather nice. We all went to another room where there were about 20 tiny children. The eldest, I should think, could not have been more than 3 years old, and they stood in a group on the floor with the smallest ones in front. I noticed that several of these small ones had a delicacy of features and a tint of clothing that was ethereal and different, and I had the impression that they were stillborn babies, or, had been stillborn babies. My wife began to tell them a fairy story. They then followed what was to me one more delightful experience of a happy state in spirit. These children were very beautiful, and their little faces were upturned and rapt in a happiness of wonder and delight as the tale unfolded. On this plane, the mind of the storyteller has greater clearness and scope, which can envelop their little minds with unspoken beauties, and even mental pictures connected with the fairy tale. When the tale ended, my wife said to them, "Now we will go into the next room and see the fairy's treasure." And off they went happily, singing a nursery rhyme, which I had not heard before, but was a happy tune and beautifully sung, as is usual in spirit when minds are in unison. The children returned, still happily singing, but I began to lose interest. My time was up, and I returned to the bed and switched on the light. As I looked at the clock, it was near 2 a.m. I was impressed about something concerning the date. I thought for a few seconds. It was April the 24th, my wife's birthday, and so the well-kept secret was out. It was her birthday party. Imagine that. He went to his wife's birthday party and didn't know. Ooh, that could get ugly. Later, a medium friend said to me, "Do you know that you tell fairy stories to spirit children?" I did not know it, but I am certain my wife does. She was a little girl of about 10 years of age, and as we walked, I had my arm around her, my hand on her shoulder. I think we've heard this one before. I thought her dress, a spirit robe, was rather long, but I was upset when I saw she had bare feet. As I had mothered my own 2 little girls after my wife passed, I felt sorry for her shoeless state, but I need not have worried, for the little girl had the situation well in hand. She was leading me on my first conducted tour of the spirit world. Zodiac has often spoken of the work of the spirit children and what they do, and some may wonder how a child can help an adult with a lifetime of knowledge, so-called knowledge. As the spirit body retains all life's thoughts, one can ponder over the millions of thoughts in an adult mind, and believe me, I have. And it's not a pleasant pondering when you think of all that junk in there. Stuff that you just don't need. I mean, there's important thoughts and there's, not so important thoughts. And then there's the perception that they're all just thoughts, whether they're important or not important, which again is another level of looking at things. And I personally reach that level quite often doing mindfulness meditation, because when you're doing that, the idea is to sort of, junk all the thoughts and emotions, and as though none of them had any significance at all. And in that state, when you sort of manage to sort of achieve it, which for some is easier than others, all thoughts tend to look sort of like, no more significant than clouds in the sky. A child who passes over at a very early age has not this massive thought, and in its innocence has a spirit body that is appropriate to a higher plane or wavelength in spirit. As the plane and its people are advanced, everything it learns is truth, and in its innocence accepts everything and speaks truth. It forms a lovely personality devoid of fear, worry, or doubt, and to be close to the aura of such a child gives one a feeling of serenity and quiet happiness. One Sunday afternoon I had projected from an armchair and was taken to a bright countryside in spirit with park-like scenery, trees and slopes. I saw several people sitting on a bench, and I went and sat next to a little girl who was sitting close to a man. I sensed that she had spent most of her life in spirit, and she began to talk to me. She was a lovely child of about 7 years of age and spoke simply and clearly, and in her conversation mentioned Jesus. Well. As her auras were mingling, I sensed a connection and asked her if she had seen Jesus lately. In a quiet, matter-of-fact way, she answered, "No, he is now on duty in the East." It was April 1961. The man sitting on the other side of the little girl was neatly dressed in office-type clothes, and being with this little girl, I thought he would know quite a lot. I leant forward and asked him, "What do you think of life after death?" To my surprise, he at once stiffened and adopted an earthly, conventional pose, and replied in a dignified tone, "I do not wish to discuss the matter." I immediately knew that he was one of the many still living in a dream world, or what has been called the plane of illusion. He did not know that he had died, and was now in the spirit world, and the little girl was patiently waiting for an opportunity to help him. I tried to think of some possible line of talk, despite their rebuff. I saw a movement beside me and turned. A lady who was sitting by my other side was rubbing her brow and seemed to be thinking deeply. She murmured as if to herself, "That's strange. Now that I come to think of it, the River Exe in Devon doesn't look the same." My journey arranged by my spirit helpers was evidently not altogether fruitless, as my thoughts had some effect on the lady. It is rather strange how those still connected with earth, like myself, can sometimes bring enlightenment to a spirit, and in a rescue circle it will be noted that a spirit brought for help will often become conscious of the new state by simply contacting the thoughts of the people in the circle. And that's why it's good to be practice rescues and retrievals and visits. You go to those planes, and the fact that you're out of body and you've got some past experiences helps the ones that are ignorant, confused, just being around them. I mean, sometimes you have to go to the next step and sort of debate with them, as you've seen me do in many videos. But often just being there helps. Spirit children are often taken on sightseeing tours in the spirit world, and on one occasion I was out of body and with my daughter who had passed over. We were watching a long line of these children. They looked the same as the children on a school outing, and I picked up one little girl and said, "And where have you come from?" And she said, "Venezuela." I asked her, "Are you tired?" Her eyebrows went up in bewilderment. "No," she said. My daughter was laughing. It was a silly question, as I knew there was no physical tiredness in spirit. But my earthly thoughts immediately connected such a journey with fatigue. During the astral projections to the spirit world, I have seen many of the earthly interests of people still being enjoyed. In the bright states, these are only part-time, as that state is only reached by helping others less progressed. It is God's law that in helping the welfare of another, self is absent and replaced by the purer God power, and this is the Master taught in various ways. See how he's getting more and more sort of conventional and Christian as he goes on? Now, maybe that would happen to many others. It hasn't happened to me. I certainly recognize the value of Jesus' teachings if we can trust what is given to us and not, think, the usual conspiracy theories that it was molded by later scribes in order to fit the political agenda of the Catholic Church, which I suspect it was, but it's a lifetime study trying to figure out the wheat from the chaff on that one. But for me, out of body travel and those experiences open up the realm of the many wise souls who have graduated and stuck around to teach us. Many, and not just the ones approved of by Christianity. I have previously mentioned my daughter in spirit who on earth enjoyed horse riding and still does so in spirit. At other times she teaches children and classes of young people. My father enjoyed his garden on earth, and on one projection he showed me a room in his house in spirit that was full of flowers like a greenhouse. It looked beautiful as the walls seemed to admit all light. Translucent walls. Well. On one occasion I was helping him to prepare the garden of a house in spirit for a newcomer. Prepare the garden of a house in spirit for a newcomer. Now think of the implications. They knew somebody was coming, or was it just any old newcomer? A friend of theirs, an acquaintance, somebody that they knew would enjoy a garden, and then they had enough confidence to prepare it in a way that would please that person. A lot of implications there. I said to him, and we can hide that shed with a row of runner beans. He was very amused, and I realized that there were more colourful flowers in spirits than scarlet runners. I've got some of them outside actually right now. They seem to grow on plants every year, no matter what you do. Beautiful little scarlet flowers. There are orchestras and brass bands in the spirit world, and I have played an instrument and have found it much easier as the fingers respond at once to thought. I should think that it is easier to learn an instrument in spirit as the mind is clearer and retentive. I have seen and enjoyed small boats sailing, and there are also ball games. In some bright states, however, one can direct a ball by thought, so there would be no point in having a competitive game. Well, I don't know about that. My spirit teacher once took me to a lower state where there were people watching a football match. When the ball narrowly missed the goal, I said to the man near me, "Ooh, that was close," and he agreed and seemed pleased to be spoken to. With my attention on the game again, he edged closer and entered my aura, and I sensed he was a pickpocket. I felt a slight touch toward my coat pocket and said, "Oh, you won't find anything there." Immediately the nimble fingers were withdrawn and were fondling the lapel of my coat. And quite unabashed he was saying, "I used to have a suit like this." This is the mentality and ignorance that enters the lower states, and one wonders with sadness as to what possible way of approach can be made to help. I would suggest when they tire of their old way of life. And that works for a lot of souls in spirit that are in what they would call the lower levels, if you like, purgatorial levels. They're just working out their issues. When their various issues run out of energy, they're ready for something different. And that's where you can step in and show them a more interesting lifestyle. I visited a park in a pleasant state in spirit, which had several buildings in which many people were entering and leaving. Each building had something of interest, including all the arts, mechanical, printing, etc. One small building had a narrow circular canal which ran through one side and out the other. Inside there were boys playing with model boats, and I said to one boy who was watching his model liner sail by, "What makes it go?" "Vibrations," he replied with gusto, and was evidently pleased to expound something a spirit teacher had told him. It was amusing to hear this word being used by one so young, yet it is the basis of all states and all activity. Last year I again met my wife's parents in the spirit world. It was a happy meeting, and I was glad to see them, as they were a cheerful couple, and they were pleased to see me. But the meeting had been arranged, for they presented me with an ebony walking stick. It was a sign that they knew walking now tired me on earth. I wonder if he took it back to earth, and I don't think you can do that. It was another spirit lesson for me, for when I left them I still felt the pleasure of their friendship and company, and I realized that my sensitive spirit body had a continuous psychometric impression of their personalities in the stick I was carrying. This is another pleasure we can look forward to in spirits. A present always carries the reminder of the donor's personality. During astral projection to the spirit world, I was once talking to one of my teachers, who drew my attention to my clothes. I saw he was wearing my usual suit, had even had a small stain on it, same as its earthly counterpart. All atoms have offshoots, electric particles, which have the same vibration as the parent atom, and therefore the same sensation or property, but in a non-physical form. So even the stain had to conform and have its replica of offshoot particles. The significance and magnitude of this must be realized as a grain of sand has its spiritual counterpart. Therefore the desert, countries, continents, seas, oceans, everything. The spiritual counterpart has no weight and is not affected by gravity, but is held by the magnetic zone surrounding our planet. During astral projection, the magnetic zone of my spirit body attracts the spirit counterpart of my earthly clothes because they hold my personal vibration. All is vibration. Different localities and countries have different atomic composition and mass, and therefore different vibrations. Racial minds have their certain traits, which is also a vibration, but it is not generally noticed by the slower physical senses. The spirit body is very sensitive, and during a projection to the spirit world, 2 unprogressed and sadly deformed people were brought to me, and I knew their nationality by their emissions. The ultimate basis of spiritual and physical things is elementary particles. Free elementary particles of different frequencies also permeate all space. Some physicists say 100 to the cubic centimeter. Yeah. In the unimaginable vastness of endless space, in which our Earth and Sun are mere specks, there is enough material, if concentrated, for many new worlds. In the spirit world, spirits can form spiritual things by the concentration of positive thought on the negative free particles, thus bringing them together. I have been in the lecture rooms in the spirit world where many subjects are taught, and spiritual science is only one of them, and it is for those who wish to know. However, having a knowledge of spiritual science or not, these good souls who empty themselves of self and extend friendliness and help to others find that their giving is replaced by further powers and pure happiness. When I have been taken to them in the bright plains, I have felt their radiations, and it seems to me that their friendliness, they have become good conductors of that God stream of power. There we go again. The greatest law of spirit, and simple to love one another. Well, who's going to deny that one? The man who entirely eliminated his self had a love and compassion for others to such an extent that he and the God stream are one. Well, that's the capital H again. In his earthly life and his mysterious miracles, they were for all to see, but his teaching was simple. After living a double life for over 30 years, sounds like an old lag's confession in a Sunday paper, I have often been saddened by a casual expression, a paragraph I have read, or something mentioned in the radio. My double life is the continual visits I have made to the spirit world, where the results of our earth life are plain to see. I've just heard on the radio that better organized bank raids and the technology can be learnt by men condemned to prison who prove that crime does pay eventually. But all crime is paid for. The reporter who seemed to admire this skill will later be appalled by his earthly ignorance. The minister of a small church spoke about his shrinking congregation, sometimes only 3 or 4 attending, and said that his living really came from the people of the past who left money to the church and who are now sleeping in the churchyard. If the minister had shed some of his theology and in his heart become as a little child, he would find that the master will amply reward his seeking. And if he finds that there are no sleepers in his churchyard, but active and friendly people in their new life willing to come and help him, he could teach that in his church and lift the hearts of many. If his sacrifice causes a few lifted eyebrows, the cross in his church should remind him of the greater sacrifice and the hatred and jeers of proud priests of that time. The news today seems to be a repetition of robbery, violence, and vandalism, all of which will have to be paid for later in the dreary twilight states, and I have seen no clever ones who have got away with it. Well, that's just what he's seen. In my experience, people who do not have a guilty conscience, and psychopaths and sociopaths can be like that, they feel entitled, do not necessarily go to a purgatorial realm. They may not go to a paradise, but they don't have that self-judgment. Or they may not have it right away. They may develop it later. There are more variations in this than this Frederick's seeing. My excursions to the spirit world are not often now, but not long ago I had an experience that gave me pleasure and was also surprising and evidential. Years ago there used to be a concert player, Joe Morley. He was a solo banjoist and I had seen him at Kensington Town Hall, and he also played at Wigmore Hall. He was well known and very popular among the fretted instrument players, both for his playing and his many compositions. Morley passed over some years ago at a good age. One afternoon, from my armchair and out of body, my spirit teacher took me to see Joe Morley in his spirit life. Morley never knew me on earth, I was just one of the audience. But the meeting gave great pleasure to both of us, and he was beaming all the time. I like these happy meetings in spirit, for when the auras intermingle, the pleasure is reciprocal and greatly intensified, far more than earthly feelings. Although he was old when he passed, he now looks about 35 or 40, with the healthy looking and fine features of spirit. Before I left him, I congratulated him on one of his fine compositions, El Contrabandista, and I said, I suppose you often play this at concerts? And Morley said, no, I never played it publicly. This surprised me, and later I wrote to the association editor of BMG, the monthly magazine for banjo, mandolin, and guitar, asking if he and any of his friends had ever heard of known Morley play his own composition, El Contrabandista. He replied neither he or his friends had known him to play it. I thereupon told him the reason for my inquiry and my meeting with Joe Morley. He very kindly gave a full account of my experience in the February issue of BMG, which I hope gave pleasure to those who knew this old player, and to the spiritually younger Joe Morley. Well, I think we've reached our time limit, or close to it today, and as I said, going over some older experiences and some new ones. Interesting you meet that character. I've certainly met some dead musicians that I was quite fond of when they were alive, and I've told those stories perhaps a little too often. Some of them are in a good place, and some of them are in a not so good realm. And like Keith Ralph from the Yardbirds, I moved him up a couple of levels, or I showed him how to move himself up, because where he was working, the electricity was rather like those countries in the world where they get 3 or 4 hours a day and then it goes off. Low vibrational level places have problems like that, and the people that live there are a little puzzled by it all. Anyway, I got him to a different level, and he plugged in and played his guitar and was happier. And since his singing and playing and compositions had given me much pleasure, with the Yardbirds and Renaissance and Armageddon, I was more than happy to help out. And, returning the favor, Anyway, enough of that for now, and we'll, I think, do one more of these tomorrow or very, very soon. So long, friends.